Hello, how are
Hi.
you? Somebody was trying to request to go live with us, so that's why it wasn't working. So I had to wait for their request to go away to add you in again.
Okay, I'm like, it wasn't me. I feel like
Yeah,
such an old lady.
no,
Okay.
no, it wasn't you. So thank you so much for tuning in. So for you guys that are tuning in, you are in for a treat. So just to keep it really real, this is my aunt, but I'm really excited to have her. Just because she's someone in wellness that is really adamant about making sure that we have a space, and and I think that it's so important just to have visual representation of Black and Brown therapists. So thank you so much for being with us today. So I want to let you introduce yourself to just tell everyone who you are.
Sure. So let me start off just by saying, so Yasmin mentioned that I am her aunt. Like, I am so proud of you. And I know, like, we've exchanged some emails and things along those lines, but just by writing a couple of Facebook posts, being super transparent. And if I'm being transparent and honest, like, you're doing something that I would have loved to do at your age, but I never had enough courage to do it. So I am just like 1000% supportive of everything that you're doing. And your platform aligns really well with mine. That's why one of the reasons, outside of the fact that we're related, one of the reasons why I was just really looking forward to working with you in some capacity, because my platform has been all about authenticity, um, and just kind of prioritizing being your authentic self, and how that has to be, forefront of everything before you can do anything well. So
Right.
I am so proud of you, and I'm
Thank you.
honored to be on your platform.
Thank you. So, just again, just like let everyone know who you are, what you do, and just a little bit of your journey of like how you came into this space. Were you always, a therapist? Like, what's that journey been like? So, if you could just take us through that experience.
Yeah, and I'll try to be super succinct, but the journey question is hard because it really has been a life journey. Um, if I had to date it, I would say it's taken 14 years of being intentional in terms of actually becoming a therapist. But I mean, it's been a life journey. I started off from a professional perspective, in a career in corporate communications, and I did that for 20 years. Worked for several different companies, Fortune 40 organizations, and I actually loved my career in communications. I knew that if I was going to be in corporate, that I had to be doing something that connected with people, and
Right.
I felt like communications was one of those ways to do that. I got to a point in my corporate career where, many of you ladies know, you may be in the same space, where you're making that decision as far as what to do next. You're, from an education perspective, you're either going to go and get an MBA or some kind of master's level degree and keep climbing that ladder. And so when I found myself in that space, I started to get really sad. Like, I remember being at work one day and I was researching MBA programs, and I got sad. And I remember being in my car that evening, driving home from work, and literally like started crying. And I'm like praying. I'm like, why am I so sad? Like, I started to think about the commitment of an MBA program and all that would entail, and the sacrifices that it would mean personally in terms of my family. And I felt conflicted because it just wasn't a sacrifice that I was willing to make to climb that corporate ladder. I am not anti-corporate. Like I said, I had a 20-year strong career in corporate. It served me well. But I knew at that point in time that I needed to be more thoughtful about what my next steps were. And if I was going to devote the time of master's level education, that I wanted to be more aligned with my purpose and my calling and my gifts. So, and I would say that was probably almost 15 years ago. And it took 15 years until I got to a place where I was practicing as a therapist full time. Um, and when I started that journey, like I said, 14 or so years ago, I didn't leave that conversation in my car with God, knowing that I wanted to become a therapist. The only thing that I knew without a doubt is whatever I did next, it was going to be more aligned with what He wanted me to do. Like, so I'm a spiritual person as well, more spiritual than uber religious. But I just knew whatever investment I was going to make in myself next had to be so specific to what I felt like my gifts were and my callings were. And so I started to have some conversations with some of my closest girlfriends, like, kind of, I'm at this crossroads. What is it that you think that I really do well? Like, what is it that you lean on me for? And through those conversations, just um, we talked a lot about, well, I call on you for guidance or advice. I can trust you, you're level headed. I always joke around like, on a scale of 1 to 10, I start at about a 2 and work my way up. And so that allows me to extend a lot of grace and compassion and patience to others. And so I think that's the reason why people would, come to me for guidance. And so through those conversations, it really resonated with me that yes, it is something that I like to do. It was something that I felt honored and proud that people would look to me, look for me to guidance in that way, or have enough respect for me and my experience, to be able to trust me enough with their life and with their big decisions. So from there, I decided that I would pursue counseling. One point that I would make, just like as I think about my journey and as I've talked about my journey in the past, I think sometimes we make a mistake because we think about profession when we start thinking about purpose and what I'm going to do next, and we automatically go to what that job is going to be. So when I made the decision to enter the master's program to become a counselor, I had no idea what vocation, I would end up in. I didn't know if I was going to be a therapist in an office. I didn't know if I might work for a church. Like, I had no idea, but all I knew was that it felt right. It felt aligned with, like I said, my calling. And so I just, continued to put one foot in front of the other and just see kind of how things played out ultimately. So I wish I can say like 14 years ago, I just really understood the need for mental health and it's important for our community. I didn't have that passion and that zeal then. I do now. And I would say probably over the past 7 or so years is when I got crisp on, okay, kind of here's the purpose, here's the call, here's the education. Now, how do you want to, put all that together,
Right.
and live it out, for the purpose and the benefit of others. So that's a long-winded answer, but I never I never want to pretend that I just woke up one day and I knew, without a doubt that I wanted to be a therapist.
Right. Well, no, absolutely. I can definitely just attest to that, just because like we just kind of fall into things, like even just like wellness. I never thought this would be something that I was, passionate about. I remember like the first time someone had like, wrote an article. It was a company called Black and Well, and it was like 12 wellness influencers you should follow. And I was like, I'm a wellness influencer? Like, okay.
You sure?
Like you exactly. I was like, you sure they talking about me? Just because of like, it was for me just like on a personal journey of like just naturally gravitating towards wellness, going to therapy, just like being on a weight loss journey. I realized that like all of those things were just me going towards that. And so once I realized that this was the space that I was going to occupy, it definitely took a while to own it. There was a lot of prayer, just because like, again, when you put that, that weight on you, there's a lot of, responsibility that comes with that. So that was something I really wanted to be adamant about, and make sure that it was something that I could handle, and that that I had the support of people around me that felt like this was a space also that I belonged in. So I also have another question for you, just to follow up with that, just in terms of, like you said, it was something that you talked to your friends about. Did you have any pushback from anyone when you told them like you were going to be a therapist, just like with the nature of our community? Like, what was that like with people? Because I know that for me, when I started going to therapy at first, my mom was supportive, but I definitely had people in my life that were like, you going to a therapist? Like, we don't need that. Like, all you need is church.
Yeah.
Like, what does that would look like? Especially because I know where you're located. You're located in the South. Like, what is just overall that that response been from the community, and what do you say to people that say, well, all you need is that?
Yeah. So in terms of the response, when I started sharing with people what I wanted to do, from again my sisters to my friends, zero pushback. And that's how as well. Like, people will come to it faster than you're willing to claim it. There were no objections. I think we were at a space as a culture where, at least a lot of people that I kind of socialized with or who were in my circle were savvy enough to begin to appreciate the value of therapy. And then I have to be honest too, part of the thing that drove me closer to being a therapist was actually going through therapy myself, and seeking out other Black therapists who I felt like could, you know, totally relate to my experience. But I didn't really get any pushback, even when I think about having conversations with my dad and with my grandmother about it, who were definitely older school, traditional. They didn't push back on it. Now, I can't say either of them has ever spent any time with a therapist. Different generation, different times. But
Yeah.
I I think people were 1,000% supportive, and I think for the people who didn't have awareness, once I told them that that's what I wanted to do, it was like, all right, yeah, that makes sense. So I think it was more of a matter of me coming to terms with, yeah, this is something that, you know, that I can do and that I can probably, you know, do well. Um, Now, extending beyond the people who, you know, who I trust, who love me well, there is still such kind of an ignorant stigma that exists in our community. Generationally, I'm loving what the millennial generation has done for therapy, just in general, to make it more casual. Like, you could sit in a room with people and say, you know, I'm seeing my therapist tomorrow, and people not look at you like, you know, like you're deranged. So I think that the conversation is starting to happen, but we still need to go a level deeper. I think people are comfortable to say they're seeing a therapist, but they're not necessarily comfortable to say what they're battling with and what they're seeing that therapist for. And I don't mean to the extent like where you need to tell everybody your business, but
Right.
people won't say, I'm going to see a therapist because I'm depressed, or I'm going to see a therapist because I'm really struggling with anxiety. And so I think the next level for our community is to begin to have deeper discussions about what mental illness is. We'll talk about mental health, but we're not ready to talk about mental illness.
Yeah.
And so I think that's been the biggest challenge for our community. What the other conversation that's on the horizon that I'm getting super excited about, I'm actually participating in a panel next week that's being hosted by a pastor who last week he did a panel with like 3 other pastors talking about COVID from the perspective of faith. And this week he's doing that same panel with 3 therapists because he wants to have a conversation about mental health.
That's awesome.
And so, not that faith and mental health is separate and distinct. If you're a spiritual person, they have to exist together. But I think I love the shirt that the T-shirt that your brand has put out. That yes, you can pray and I'm screwing it up, but something to the effect of like
That's
you
it. Just
you can go to
says,
church and therapy.
Yeah, so it
You
does.
could go to,
So it says, "Dear Black people, it's okay to pray and go to therapy." And
yeah.
then this one that I have one today, it says like it's short, so you can't see the whole thing, but it says like healing from this trauma, so my kids don't have to.
Yes.
And so, you know, like for us, that's like, it's really really important. And like you said, like I definitely feel like there should be a balance of the two. And, you know, something that's really important for me, like I'm really passionate about the fact that like, I feel like wellness is like as multifaceted as Black people are. You know, we're many things. And so I feel like with wellness, it should be free to take on as many forms as it sees fit. So for us, I think, you know, spiritual rituals, and, you know, therapy and church and, you know, all those things. I think that it's important that we have the balance of the two of those. And so that's something that I'm really passionate about. So I know that you were just talking about right now how everyone is feeling. So like emotions are really high right now. I feel like, you know, half of social media is like, you know, if you don't write the next novel, you don't do the next thing, then then you lack discipline. And the other half is like, watch all the Netflix you want, you know,
Yeah.
and, you know, if all you do is make your bed today, that's fine, you know?
Right.
And so I think that just like from, you know, again, from like a mental health perspective, it is important to have some level of productivity just while you're indoors, just because for me personally, you know, productivity is a part of my mental health, but I also want to give myself grace. So like to anyone struggling, like as a therapist, what would you say to them just in terms of like learning how to find that balance, coming out of this, you know, situation stronger mentally, physically, and emotionally, but also taking that time to take care of themselves? Like, what would you say to anyone who's definitely like struggling right now?
Yeah, I think, and just to be honest, I struggle the same. Um, it goes back to what you were saying. I think balance is super important, but
Yeah.
one of the things, and I'm going to get textbook really quickly, but then I'll come back to life. But one of the things, and I've been thinking about this, like the beauty of this situation is that it's something that globally we are experiencing together, and you don't normally have a crisis that is like that. And especially for the Black community, there are things that we deal with, like, police brutality, things along those lines that are so specific to our community. We're mourning and grieving, and no one else really understands or can participate. In this situation, everyone is going through it. And so, a lot of what I'll share with you are things that I have to challenge myself with on as well. And so the first is really just recognizing and appreciating the fact that this is a traumatic time. And I think we're all trying to do our best to, stay positive. Like I find myself struggling sometimes because I'm like, I have a roof over my head. I'm here with two of my three guys, my husband and my youngest son. My oldest is away at school in Atlanta. But I'm here with them. I have love. I have the comforts of home. We have all the food we can eat, all the toilet paper that we need. And so who am I to complain when I do know that there are people in other parts of the world, hell, other parts of the country who are struggling in a different way. But at the same time, if you think about trauma, and so there's a psychologist who's like renowned for his work in dealing with trauma and therapy. His name is Dr. Basil Vanderkolk. And I'm going to walk through the things that he defines as trauma.
Okay.
And this is not specific to COVID, but just in general, how he conceptualizes trauma.
Right.
And you tell me, or you guys tell me if any of this resonates with our experience today. So lack of predictability, loss of connection, loss of sense of time, loss of sense of purpose, loss of mobility, numbing out or spacing out, and loss of safety. So as he was reading through that, I was actually watching a webinar of his recently. As he was reading through that, I'm like, check.
Yeah.
Check, check.
I was about to say, like, all of those things, like, just as you were reading through, I'm like, yeah.
All of it. And so we have to give ourselves, like, grace and permission to respect where we are right now. Before we can start thinking about how productive we're going to be. Like, I'm all for productivity. I'm all about, having a certain standard of excellence. But there's a balance between being so focused and driven that you miss the experience. And we can't miss this, because what will happen is once we come out on the other side, and in hindsight, we'll recognize that we were in a traumatic space and we ignored it because we were paying attention to the wrong things. So I think there's balance. I don't want you to stay in the bed all day watching Netflix and chilling. But I don't necessarily think that you need to work on, you should have a degree by the time you finish, or you should have a novel finished by the time you finish. But can you work on your outline for your best-selling novel, have a glass of wine and watch Netflix later? That to me feels like more intentional and more productive. But I think if you think about all those things that I just mentioned, a good way to be productive is make sure you're doing something that does proactively address each one of those things.
Right.
So I'm not saying roll up in a corner and don't do anything, but if you're gonna do something, make sure it's productive beyond just your career or vocation. But make sure it's productive too in terms of like your self-care and your emotional health and wellness, your relationships with your family.
So something that we talked about before the live started that I wanted to discuss with you was that you are the parent of millennial. And so you discussed with me that you feel like this, again, keeping with that same conversation of like us learning how to balance, being really productive, feeling like we have to have our whole lives figured out, by 30. Like, what do you think that has, what that effect has on millennials right now? And how can like we specifically take this time to understand like that, yes, we have dreams and goals and purpose, but we still have to take space for ourselves during this time?
Yeah, to take a breath And like I said, this is a fine opportunity to take a collective breath.
Right.
One of the things, so my college guy is one of the most kind of ambitious, motivated people that I know, to the extent that he motivates and inspires me. But we had some good conversations when he was home over Christmas break, because he was developing some really poor sleep habits, eating habits as well, but especially sleep, because so he's in college, but then he's also pursuing like his personal goals, which is a career in music and a career in creative arts. So he would finish his homework and then work on like a big project for his company or for his music. And so it's nothing for him to night after night go to bed at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
And then he started to tell me, he get in the bed at 3 a.m. but still not fall asleep until 4. And so I'm like, son, like he is so gifted, so intelligent. I'm like, you have so much to offer the world, like so much value, but you have to focus on your vessel. Like I started to get worried about him. As proud as I am of him in terms of being ambitious, I started to get worried. And so I'm like, you have to learn now to, take a breath and don't buy into that don't sleep culture, because it's not healthy. And especially if you're a person that requires a certain level of sleep. I think people who are ambitious, you're going to grind regardless. If you are intentional about, okay, 5 nights a week I'm going to get my full 8 hours, you're going to figure out how to make it up on Saturday or Sunday.
Right.
So we started doing things while he was at home, like meditating together, just unplugging, obviously spending time, like just having conversations away from technology. I bought him a gift card for the salt baths, essentially. Like, I don't know if you guys have them in Jersey, but they're like where you go, you're in a cocoon essentially, and all you're doing is floating in salt water. And you totally zone out for like 45 minutes. So I did it. I thought it was great. I bought him a gift certificate for Christmas, thinking like he's probably not going to use it. I'm going to get 2 floats for one. But he decided before he went back to school that he was going to use it and that he was going to have a me day. And so imagine this 6 foot something, 200 plus kid with dreads coming into the float spa to get relax on. I'm sure they didn't know what to do with that, but anyway, he did that. He did got his hair cut, did some other kind of self-care related things, and at the end of the day, when he came home, he was like, this was really cool. Like, this was a me day, and I'm going to try to do this at least once a month. And so, like, you can incorporate that, and still, like, 6 weeks later, he put out another EP and got things list, straight A's. I'm not bragging. I'm bragging.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So both is possible. Like, both can exist. Like, no one wants to be with me when I'm on for like 70 hours a week.
Right.
I'm not fun. And so these people who are losing sleep are probably hurt in relationships, in addition to just kind of not caring for themselves in the best of ways.
Absolutely. So in terms of self-care that you just talked about, so for so many of us, once we get out of here, I'm sure we're gonna, run to spas, run to pools and make sure that we're good. But for right now, with being home, there's only so much we can do.
Yeah.
So what are some tips that we can use to practice self-care right where we are? Because I've just been saying online, people are doing yoga, they're working out, but for people that aren't even able to leave their homes, what can they do to make sure that they're mentally in a good space?
Yeah. So floating and massages and all that, that's nice. I love to do those things as well. But like, self-care is free, guys. It's free. Sometimes we overcomplicate it, or we feel like self-care has to be this big production. It should sometimes. I love a good spa day. But it's free. There are tons of things that you can do that doesn't require anything but your intentional time. And so some of the things that I'll mention, so meditation, I mentioned being mindful. There's an app that I love called Simple Habit. And there are tons of free meditations that are available. Like you can literally search whether or not you need energy or whether or not you need support with sleep. You can search it. So I would definitely, and they go from 5 to 30 minutes. Meditation is hard, especially Black folks. We freeze up when we say meditation because we think you need to be in a room for an hour by yourself. Like literally, there are sessions anywhere from 5 minutes up until probably a half hour. So that's free. Going outdoors, all the typical things that you're hearing, it's because it's true. Like take a walk, ride a bike, walk your pet. There is nothing like fresh air, especially this time of year. Um, Podcasts. So there's so much content available. Like I could not imagine doing this pandemic 20 years ago. But there's so much free content available. So look for content that feeds your soul. In addition to the Netflixing, like look, there's so much YouTube. I mean, so much content out there that feeds your soul. Like soul care is about like turning inward.
Right.
And so I think the other thing that I think is really important is like understanding what self-care means for you. Understanding what you need to care for yourself, because that might look different from one person to the next. And so now is the perfect time, because we do have a little bit more time, to stop and be reflective. Like get out a pen and paper and write down kind of, here are the things that are important for me to feel well, and give that some intentional thought, and then just be proactive about doing those things. I think another thing that's important as far as self-care is being emotionally well. And this is something that I do like with all of my clients. We start off with emotions and being able to identify emotions and being able to articulate those emotions. So a lot of times, you know, and you guys, you might have heard of primary and secondary emotions. So primary emotions are the ones that we could get to really quickly. They're like, I'm mad, I'm happy, I'm sad. But then secondary emotions go a little bit deeper. So I'm frustrated, or I feel that this is unfair, or I feel betrayed. A part of self-care is being able to sit with yourself and dig deep about what it is that you're feeling. So instead of saying I'm scared, take the next step and process through, well, what's driving those feelings of fear? What's making you feel vulnerable? I think as a community, and especially us, I think that's there's an opportunity for Black folks to be a bit more in touch with their emotions, and not to feel like, you know, everything is neutral and we really can't feel any way except for happy or blessed or, you know, highly favored. And so now is the perfect time, since we have some downtime, like go online and research emotions. Sometimes we start to get down and judgmental because we're feeling something, but we're unable to identify what that feeling is, and then take that next step and be able to articulate that feeling to someone else. That is self-care. So just being intentional about how you spend the time to turn inward. Turning inward is self-care, and giving yourself grace and permission to be like non-judgmental, because we are our worst critics. And so giving yourself grace to the extent that this week I started work at like 11 o'clock every day. I get out of my bed between 10:30ish, depending on what's happening. The first day I did that, I was like, oh my gosh, you were so lazy. You were not productive. And then, but why? Like, why? And because I'm fine too, starting at 11 and going a little bit later. I've never been a morning person. So stop being abusive to yourself. Like that is self-care 101. Be compassionate.
Absolutely.
Give that same grace that you would to your friend if they were calling you about that problem. Give that grace to yourself, like that. So we're going to practice non-judgment in this quarantine, and we're going to be okay with, you know, starting work at 11 o'clock or eating ice cream at 3 o'clock in the afternoon just because you felt like it.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. I saw an interview actually just yesterday with Jada Pinkett and her brother said that he had heard a quote one day that said, like, treat yourself like you're someone you care about. And I was like,
Love that.
I like that. Like, I'm going to start doing that more often, because I've definitely been in a space where, like, I'm used to getting up at 5 a.m. So lately I've been getting up at like 7:30 And last week I woke up at like 10 o'clock and I was like, oh my God, I cannot be sleeping this late. This is not okay.
Yeah.
Then I was like, where am I going? Like,
Right.
why, like, I'm not rushing to the train, but it's that, you know, that routine of like getting on the train because I commute to the city every day. So it's the commute. It's like those things that are like ingrained in you from like that being your schedule. And now breaking out of that, that can even be traumatic in a sense. Like, even though you're tired, even though you're, you know, just like breaking away from your day-to-day routine that even brings you stress, it's still some sense of normalcy that you're not having now. So it's definitely been just a learning process for me to break out of that. So you were definitely helpful, but I want to give some other people some time to ask you some questions as well. So I want to open it up to see if anyone has any questions. You can put them down in the chat and I'll read them. Someone just wrote a question saying, what would your advice be to a friend that is battling depression and has been for a while? Let me look at the full question. Let me see. Okay, so she basically said, like, what advice would you give to someone who's battling depression and has been for a while? So she has a friend that's been battling and she doesn't necessarily know how to have the conversation with her as far as like what steps to move forward.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to what we were talking about a little earlier. Like, we'll talk about going to therapy, but we won't talk about the why. And we'll casually say, "Oh, I'm feeling depressed," but we won't talk about depression as a real mental illness, the same way as bipolar or schizophrenia. There's one thing. It's one thing to have a situation occur that's negative, like say the loss of a loved one, and then you feel depressed about it. That's situational. It's normal. We're human. Right. We're all susceptible to feeling sadness and depression. But when depression gets to the extent that it goes on, you know, it goes on for a while. It's not necessarily situational. You know, you're feeling exhausted. You're feeling defeated. It feels bigger than you are. That's the point when it becomes a mental illness. Like, and I was going to just try to pretty that up and say something different, but I'm gonna call it what it is. That's when it becomes mental illness, because you are incapable of caring for it on your own.
Right.
I think and so I'm not jumping all the way to medication, but I'm definitely jumping to therapy. And what people don't understand or don't appreciate about depression is that it is there's a chemical imbalance that occurs in the brain that causes the depression. So literally, you are not equipped to be able to process and experience happiness in the same way others could. And again, that's happening in your brain. It's beyond your control. So it's not just, oh, a bad spirit, or, you know, I'm feeling down. There's some things that are happening chemically that need to be addressed. The same way we would if I love TBG said recently during an interview that, you know, he says a prayer before he takes his high blood pressure medication at night, right? So it definitely, you know, if this is a person of faith, they should absolutely be praying. A spiritual balance, if relationship with God is important to you, if that is off, then that can lead to depression or exacerbate the depression. So both have to be true. But again, this is when for someone to ask about their friend, that means it's something that other people are observing, which doesn't always happen, because a lot of times people who are depressed suffer in silence. So if it's to the extent that it's something that a friend or a loved one observed, it's definitely time to seek attention. And that attention can start and should start with therapy. And there are tons of resources. There are lots of therapists who work on what's considered like a sliding scale that's income based. If you don't have insurance, there are therapists who do pro bono work. So finances are not always a barrier to mental health services. There are counseling hotlines and things along those lines, but I would absolutely direct that person to therapy while you're demonstrating love and care and compassion. I wouldn't call them and say, "Hey, you got a mental illness, you know, go talk to a therapist," but help love them to therapy.
Absolutely. So we also had another question, and that was, how do you give yourself, like, you know, the energy and the drive to self-motivate?
It's hard. It's hard, but so, you know, and this is another thing about depression. Sometimes people will say, oh, I'm not motivated, I don't feel inspired, I just can't get up and do this. A lot of times that is depression. Again, one of the key symptoms of depression is exhaustion. And that's because most people, you're trying to fight your way out of depression every day, or just overexert yourself trying to be happy. And that can be just exhausting. So I like to be careful when I hear people talk about not being motivated, just to assess, like, are you actually feeling depressed? And if you deal with those depressive symptoms, will that free up mental capacity for you to then be able to be driven and motivated? Because a lot of times when you're depressed, the only energy that you have is focused on the day-to-day, the stuff that you need to get done, all that extra stuff. You just don't have
Yeah.
the energy and the passion for it. And I speak from experience. I try to be as transparent as possible. I've dealt with depression, and I know that lots of times when I personally feel unmotivated, I'm checking in, like, okay, what's going on the emotional level. And then two, so moving away from depression, who are you surrounding yourself with? So I make sure that there are people in my circle that when I don't feel as motivated, either I can just watch what they're doing. That could be through social media, or we're connected enough where I could give them, give them a call and say, hey, I'm just, I'm in a rut, or I have this idea, I don't know what to do next. Your community and who you surround yourself with is just super important when it comes to motivating, because it's self motivation is a misnomer in a way, because you really need to a lot of times be motivated enough to look to other sources to help, to help with that drive, or respark the flame. So, but it's not easy, and we're all challenged with it. I think you could talk to some of the most successful people, and there have been periods in their lives where they just couldn't get the engine started. So
Absolutely. So I want to just ask you one more follow-up question, just because you touched on earlier with mental illness. You said that we're all, we're ready to talk about therapy, but just for so many of us, like, delving into mental illness, like, we're afraid to go there. And so if there's anyone that's watching this live, or that will watch it later on the replay, that has a mental illness, that were already, dealing with their own things, because I think that's also something to, speak to as well, that, that post, COVID, people were already dealing with, trauma. They were already in situations where they were feeling overwhelmed. And so this is essentially like, just like brought on more stress, and more anxiety. And so if, someone's battling a mental illness, what does that journey for them look like? How can they make sure that they're, practicing self-care in their homes, that they're being mindful of, what their triggers are, even just as far as like getting medication, just what that whole process looks like while they're home? What would you tell someone?
Yeah, so this situations like this definitely compound issues for people already dealing with mental health issues. I mean, one of the most important things is to continue to do the work. So if you were already someone who's dealing with a mental health issue, a mental health challenge, and you've either been through therapy or you've gotten some support in terms of how to manage, you need to continue to do that.
Right.
And that's the thing too. It's like, once you have these diagnoses in terms of depression or anxiety or others, it's not like, you check a box, you know what it is. There's work that's required, so that you have the proper tools and support to manage through, and to manage through times exactly like this. People generally get depressed and anxious about, again, things that they can't control.
Right.
And this is, it doesn't get any better than this in terms of what you can't control. And so it's continuing to do the work, to kind of manage through those symptoms, because it's almost inevitable that you'll start to experience those symptoms again. The other thing, and this is again something that I have to tell myself in those moments where I need to be checked, is this is not going to be forever. And so for people who were maybe doing well in managing their symptoms, and then came into this crisis and now they're struggling again, it's okay. This is not forever. It's just an opportunity to practice everything that and that gets to be exhausting, because you just want to wake up every day and be happy. But there's work that's required. Don't overwhelm yourself though, because again, some of this is beyond our control. And so, people are in situations where they might not know where their next check is coming from or what their job situation is going to look like. There are people who, who are in school, and just so many different things that are absolutely beyond our control, that this is an opportunity to really pause and just maybe relinquish some of those things that you really have no influence over at this point, but kind of hone in, lean in those areas where you can control, and that goes back to yourself and the self-care. But I tell clients often, clients who come and they're dealing with a myriad of different issues all at once, like, just like everything else, prioritize. So everything can't be on fire at the same time. So of everything that you're dealing with right now, is there one thing that you can put on a shelf? It doesn't mean we're pretending it doesn't exist, or but it's an opportunity to say, all right, here are 3 other things that really do need my attention. This one I'm going to put on hold for a while and come back to it. And literally, like, helping clients to even visualize that, like, I'm picking this thing up and I'm putting it on the shelf and I'm going to come back to it later. So I would definitely say, pause, be reflective, and then, prioritize your issues. What can you take on, and what do you just not have the capacity to take on? And, whatever you choose that to be, then again, give yourself that grace and that permission to be gentle with yourself. I had, we're all safe here. I had a white colleague once, female, who said that to me. Like, she's like, just be gentle with yourself, Val. And I'm like, she said it in a way that only non-Black women can say, but it felt so foreign to me. Like, it felt so foreign. Like, what do you mean? Like, but it resonated with me at the same time. So it's something that, I try to keep as a mantra and share with other people. Like, be gentle with yourself.
Yes, no, absolutely. I actually had a similar moment, but with the Asian roommate in college. I was like, just like in a really just dark time, and I was just like looking to everyone else to be there for me. And she was like, "You need to be your own security." And I was like, "What? Like, girl, what are you talking about?" Like, but then like just like in the end, just like with like understanding like self-sufficiency and like how that is self-care as well.
Yeah.
Just like, just like, really like tapping into the fact that like, that no one can do everything alone, but that there is power in like, being sufficient, and, like standing on your own too. And so like, that's something that's been really, really important, that I tell myself, all the time when I find myself feeling like I don't have enough resources or enough support, just like knowing that I really can be my own security. So I definitely, and like just that, what you said, just as far as, being gentle, it definitely did. It hit home. I'm so glad that you got a chance to talk with me. I definitely feel like so many people in here, were really helped by what it is that you do. So for all of us that want to find you, so for someone asked where you were located, so I know that you're located in North Carolina, correct? I want to be accurate on that. So you're located in North Carolina. So if anyone that's in that area, they can work with you. But outside of that, you also do life coaching. So if you could talk with us about that, and is that something, if someone wanted to connect with you, can they talk with you about that? How can they reach you to, to find out more about your services?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are in North Carolina, and especially right now, like many other therapists, I'm doing telehealth services. So all of my sessions are virtual video, and which allows me to expand my reach beyond my local area. So if you're in North Carolina, I'm at ValerieMillerWilliams.com, ValerieMillerWilliams.com. You can get information on my background and also schedule sessions right online. For those in the Charlotte area, same thing again. Everybody's virtual right now because I'm essential, but I'm not taking those chances. So ValerieMillerWilliams.com, but my office in Charlotte. So for those who are local who want to start something virtual now and transition to face-to-face, that's an option. In terms of life coaching, career coaching, development coaching. So as I mentioned, I bring to therapy 20 years of corporate experience, professional development, and from a coaching perspective, I really try to blend the two, psychology and professional development. And so if there are folks who are interested in defining life goals, my approach is always about looking at the person holistically. It's very difficult to work with someone on career goals and they're just a hot mess inside emotionally. And vice versa. I have some clients who come to me because they're all out of sorts and they think they're depressed and really they just don't have, they haven't established any life goals or aspirations. So the coaching is different from therapy. I will say that, especially from an out-of-state perspective, if I'm working with a client out of state, I cannot work with you as a therapist if you live out of state. But like I said, in terms of coaching and just working on establishing kind of what's important to you, what those gifts and callings are, and how you want to package that along with emotional wellness and be your absolute very best self. I am open and thrilled and anointed to be that person for you.
Yes, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on. Like, it was just such a great conversation. I'm really glad that you got to, take the time. This has really been important just for me in general, like you said, to like discuss more than, just business. So, but I definitely wanted to get that, a level of expertise from you. But yeah, I feel like just in general, when we first started having events, people would often ask me like, when are you going to start having networking events? When are you going to start having? And I was just like, we need to heal. Like we need to, make sure that we're okay inside, because I think that for so many of us, I was finding that, people that I had like graduated with or that I had, like come across at events, like they didn't have the confidence to be in those rooms to network, and, really put themselves out there. And I think that like that just tied into like where they were mentally. And so I just decided that like maybe if we had more spaces where we could take care of ourselves, we would have the confidence to, affirm ourselves in these spaces and, say what it is that we do, in a way that we not necessarily are doing now. And so that's why like just in general wellness is really important to me. And I definitely want to make sure that we get you on for some more things moving forward. And once we're all back outside, we're definitely gonna, go to some of the places where we have, our following, because our community is really strong up here, but we also have people in the South as well. So, we definitely want to make sure that when we start to come down, down towards the South, that we make sure we have you a part of some things that we're going to be doing. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, make sure you let everyone know what your Instagram is so they can find you on there too.
Yeah, so it's Val_M_Williams. I'm trying to be more active on Instagram, but that is where I am now.
You're getting there. You're getting there.
I'm getting there, right? I'm so proud of myself. I was able to connect on this live thing. But yeah, Val_M_Williams is where I am on Instagram. And then, like I said, Valerie Miller Williams. .com for everything else. So yeah, I'm so incredibly happy that we had an opportunity to do this. The conversation is so important, and would love to just continue to support you in this journey. We need each other.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much. My family's in here, so before I leave, I want to say like thank you guys. Love you. Because I saw like some people in the comments, but I was just trying to keep the conversation going. But to everyone that's been, watching, thank you guys so much. We have, a week more long of programming. So tomorrow we're actually having, what is tomorrow? So tomorrow's Friday. So we have a happy hour because like we're having like a girls' weekend. So we're going to have at 6 o'clock, we're going to be having cocktails with Ty. And then at 9 o'clock, we're going to have DJ Shelly. Hello, we got a cameo. I love it. And then
my mascot.
And then on Saturday, we're going to have a yoga flow at 12 o'clock with Jay Javon. And then at 6 p.m. on Saturday evening, for all the couples, we're going to have Ayana Iman come on and share date night tips at home. So that way you can still keep date nights fun and spicy while you're there. Mm-hmm. And then on Sunday, we're going to have an Insecure watch party. So make sure you guys stay tuned in for all the stuff we have going on.
Sounds fun.
Val, love you. Thank you so much for participating. Love you. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Tell your mom to get on that family reunion group chat.
I will.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.